Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, January 25th, 2022. President Joe Biden warns that he could sanction Russian President Vladimir Putin personally if Russia invades Ukraine. President Biden also again stating there's no intention of putting U.S. or NATO forces directly into a war between Russia and Ukraine, but in Biden's words, there are going to be serious economic consequences if Putin moves. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell praising President Biden on his handling of the Russia-Ukraine tension, saying that Biden is moving in the right direction. And the White House exploring ways to help Europe through a cold winter if Russia cuts off energy supplies. We'll have the latest coming up. Also today, the Commerce Department warning of possible factory shutdowns if computer chip shortages are not addressed. We'll get the details from Bloomberg technology reporter. And Florida Governor Ron DeSantis accusing the Biden administration of medical authoritarianism after the FDA limits the use of monoclonal antibodies to treat COVID omicron cases. White House responding, it's crazy for Governor DeSantis to continue pushing treatments the FDA says are not effective against Omicron. Ukraine's leaders sought Tuesday to reassure the nation that an invasion from neighboring Russia was not imminent, writes the Associated Press, even as they acknowledged the threat is real and received a shipment of U.S. military equipment to shore up their defenses. Moscow has denied it's planning an assault, but has massed an estimated 100,000 troops near Ukraine in recent weeks and is holding military drills at multiple locations in Russia. The AP story goes on, that has led the United States and its NATO allies to rush to prepare for a possible war. NATO said it was bolstering its deterrence in the Baltic Sea region, and the U.S. ordered 8,500 troops on higher alert for potential deployment to Europe as part of an alliance response force if necessary. President Biden in Washington today went out of the White House to a local craft shop, and while there, after shopping for his family, he took reporters' questions. They were all about Russia and Ukraine.
This morning, you spent a lot of time with your national security team at the White House. Are there any updates on Ukraine, Mr. President?
No updates, except that there's been no change in the posture of the Russian forces. There have, and now they're, as you know, they're along the entire Belarus border. And I made it clear to early on to President Putin that if he were to move into Ukraine, that there'd be severe consequences, including significant economic sanctions, as well as I'd feel obliged to beef up our presence, NATO's presence on the Eastern Front, Poland, Romania, etc. And but I see, I was watching one of you on television pointing out the fact that, and I think you got it right, whoever it was, I'm embarrassed, I don't remember who, saying that this is all Putin. I don't think even his people know for certain what he's going to do.
Would you ever see yourself personally sanctioning him if he did invade Ukraine?
Yes.
You would?
I would see that.
What would it take to trigger the deployment of the 8,500 troops that you've put on high alert? And what's your message to those forces that are on high alert?
Those forces on high alert they're part of a NATO operation, not a sole U.S. operation, and I've made it clear to President Putin that we have a sacred obligation, Article 5 obligation to our NATO allies, and that if in fact he continued to build up and/or was to move, we would be reinforcing those troops. And I've spoken with every one of our NATO allies in person, virtually, and we're all on the same page. We've got to make it clear that that there's no reason for anyone, any member of NATO, to worry whether or not NATO would come to their defense.
And Mr. President, what
Thank
about?
you guys, Thank you guys.
Can you, may I ask you about when you'll make a decision about deploying those troops? What will lead to that?
What would lead to that is what's going to happen, what Putin does or doesn't do. And I may be moving some of those troops in the nearer term, just because it takes time. And again, it's not provocative. It's just exactly what I said. Is that as long as we have to reassure. If you notice, you don't see a lot of concern in terms of their security of our NATO allies in Western Europe, but in Eastern Europe, there's reason for concern. They're along the Russian border, they're the Belarus border. So everyone from Poland on has reason to be concerned about what would happen and what spillover effects could occur. We have no intention of putting American forces or NATO forces in Ukraine. But as I said, there are going to be serious economic consequences if he moves.
Can you tell me whether you think, sir, that the risk of an invasion is increasing or decreasing or steady just as it has been these recent days?
You know, I'll be completely honest with you. It's a little bit like reading tea leaves. Ordinarily, if we're a different leader, the fact that he continues to build forces along Ukraine's border from Belarus all the way around, you'd say, well, that means that he is looking like he's going to do something. But then you look at what his past behavior is and what everyone is saying, and his team, as well as everyone else, as to what is likely to happen. It all comes down to his decision. Look, let me conclude by saying there will be enormous consequences if he were to go in and invade, as he could, the entire country, or a lot less than that as well, for Russia, not only in terms of economic consequences and political consequences, but it will be enormous consequences worldwide. This would be the largest, if he were to move in with all those forces, it would be the largest invasion since World War II. It would change the world.
Thank you guys. Thanks guys. Let's go. Thank you guys. Let's go. Thank you guys. You guys, come on. Let's go. Thank you.
There is not going to be any American forces moving into Ukraine.
President Biden speaking with reporters at a store in Washington, D.C. He was there doing some shopping, also went next door and got some ice cream, but taking the opportunity to speak with reporters. They all asked him about that one subject. A new Pew Research Center poll out today putting the president's approval rating at 41%. That's down from last September's 44%, and the high point, 59% last April. More U.S. military assistance to Ukraine arriving today. U.S. Embassy in Kyiv tweeting about 300 Javelin anti-tank missiles and about 80 tons of equipment now on the ground. The U.S. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell offering some supportive words for how President Biden is handling Russia and Ukraine. McConnell taking reporters' questions in his home state of Kentucky.
Senator, how closely are you watching what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, and have you had any conversations with the White House about that situation?
I sure have. I think the situation with regard to the Russians and the possibility of an invasion of Ukraine is extremely serious. My advice to the White House from the very beginning was that whatever steps we are going to take, and I'll outline the steps that I think ought to be taken, need to be taken before an invasion, not afterwards. Once the Russians have grabbed a piece of Ukraine or tried to overthrow the entire government, it's really too late. So my advice to the president and his team from the very beginning was, let's do the following things and do them now. Both ground-to-air, Stinger missiles, the weapons that also can be used against tanks, into Ukraine now. Forward deploying additional NATO troops, including some of our own, into Poland, Romania, the Baltics, now, not after an incursion. I read that the president was huddled at Camp David Sunday with his team, and what I've been hearing since then is encouraging, that they're prepared to take steps before an incursion, not afterwards. I've not been near the news this morning, so I'm not sure what additionally may have occurred, but it appears to me the administration is moving in the right direction.
The Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell at the Kentucky Emergency Operations Center in Frankfort, Kentucky. He was there mainly to talk about recovery from the deadly tornadoes that hit the western part of his state in December. Reporters taking that opportunity to ask him questions about Russia and Ukraine. An article at Politico talking about what's before the Senate dealing with sanctions. It reads, 8 senators from both parties met Monday evening to hammer out a Russia sanctions bill that would bolster U.S. efforts to deter Vladimir Putin from invading Ukraine. Multiple people familiar with the discussion told Politico. The preliminary talks between the 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans revolved around Senate Foreign Relations Chair Bob Menendez's mother of all sanctions legislation, which as written authorizes a slate of harsh financial penalties that would kick in only after any Russian invasion of Ukraine. The bill mirrors the Biden administration's approach thus far to the worsening crisis, but Republicans supportive of sanctioning Russia want at least some penalties imposed before any invasion rather than after the fact. You can read more at Politico.com. Senator Todd Young is a Republican from Indiana. He's on the Foreign Relations Committee. He's not one of the 8 senators referenced in that article. He was asked today about sanctioning Russia and also about President Biden on Monday putting those 8,500 U.S. troops on heightened alert from possible deployment to Europe.
Do you think President Joe Biden should send U.S. troops to Eastern Europe?
Without delay. I think whatever can be done to establish deterrence needs to be done in short order. It's unclear because Vladimir Putin is very good at being unclear and unpredictable when an invasion might occur. And to the extent we can, arm the Ukrainians to deter such an invasion, and B, position our forces in neighboring countries, allied countries, to lend further deterrence, I think that is prudent rather than waiting until after the fact.
There's been some calls to do some preemptive sanctions on Russia. Is that something you might support? And if so, do you think these sanctions would actually deter Putin from moving forward?
Well, I think it's important that we take reciprocal actions to the aggressive actions of Vladimir Putin. So I would certainly regard marching tens of thousands of troops through Belarus and onto the border of Ukraine as an aggressive action, and some sort of reciprocal actions do indeed need to be taken. So sanctions would be appropriate. I wouldn't exhaust all sanctions, though, at this point, because, of course, we need to be able to incrementally heighten sanctions and other reciprocal actions based on escalation from Vladimir Putin.
Senator Todd Young, Republican from Indiana, interviewed by Anna Palmer, who is founder and CEO of Punchbowl News. Congressman Gregory Meeks, Democrat from New York, chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, leading a bipartisan congressional delegation, first to NATO headquarters in Brussels, Belgium, and then on to Kyiv, Ukraine, to show solidarity with the Ukrainian government and its people in the standoff with Russia. This is the 3rd recent trip to Ukraine by U.S. lawmakers. White House today standing by its assessment that an invasion from Russia is imminent, despite what Ukrainian officials said today. White House also announcing it's working to deal with potential winter fuel shortages in Europe if Russia were to limit its energy deliveries, perhaps in response to Western sanctions if a war does break out. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki asked for some details.
The U.S. is talks with other countries to deal with potential shortages in gas supply. Can you speak to that a little bit, and in particular, what requests you've made of Qatar and whether they have responded about whether they would be able to step in and fill any shortfalls should that happen in the case of a conflict?
Sure. So it's our approach is not about any one country or any individual entity. We're engaging with a range of countries and partners to discuss what could be shortages. So I'm not going to get into any specifics of what any conversations entail. They can certainly speak for themselves. But what I can give you an update on is that a disruption, of course, in physical energy supplies transiting Ukraine would most acutely affect natural gas markets in Europe. And so we're engaging our European allies to coordinate response planning, including how to deploy their existing energy stockpiles. That's part of it. But we've also been working to identify additional volumes of non-Russian natural gas from North Africa and the Middle East, Asia, and the United States. We're in discussion with major natural gas producers around the globe to understand their capacity and willingness to temporarily surge natural gas output and to allocate these volumes to European buyers. And we're also engaging with major buyers and suppliers of LNG to ensure flexibility in existing contracts and storage is managed and enables diversion to Europe. So we are, of course, preparing, as we are in a lot of other areas, a range of contingencies should there be a disruption for a range of reasons to natural gas. I would also note that natural gas markets are very regional by nature, given constraints on how much can be exported. So any reduction in Russian exports of natural gas to Europe would have a minimal impact on U.S. prices. That's what our anticipation would be.
The White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki with reporters in the White House briefing room. And the White House later saying, from a statement from the press secretary, that the Emir of Qatar will visit the White House and meet with President Biden on January 31st. Russia provides about 40% of Europe's natural gas supply. In Germany, it's over 50%. We're finding out more from the State Department spokesman Ned Price about when and what the content will be of the U.S. written response to Russia's demands. Russia has said that it never wants Ukraine to be able to join NATO or some other countries that have been under consideration, and that the U.S. and NATO should pull back its forces from some of the Eastern Bloc countries that they put them in and have joined NATO since the fall of the Soviet Union. Here's more from State Department spokesman Ned Price at his briefing today.
I know you aren't going to preview exactly, what this is going to say, but for our expectation purposes, will this written response speak in broad terms that you have already made very public about the ideas that the U.S. sees for the U.S. and Russia potentially working together on strategic, stability and the like, or will it have specific ideas, specific proposals that are on the table for negotiation's sake?
I think the answer to that is both. We've been very clear about the areas in which there may be some utility and where progress can be achieved when it comes to enhancing transatlantic security, when it comes to enhancing collective security, when it comes to addressing some of the concerns that Russia has put forward. And so in the discussions with Foreign Minister Lavrov and the discussions with Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov and the discussions at NATO and the discussions with the OSCE, there have been broad, high-level discussions about various principles, including the principle we've just discussed here. But then there have also been more tactical discussions, discussions about the placement of missiles, discussions about reciprocal steps vis-a-vis exercises, about confidence-building measures, about transparency, about broader arms control. So the universe in which we can engage diplomatically, or at least in which we can engage diplomatically and potentially achieve some progress, we've outlined what that universe looks like. The Russians know that. We've done that together with our allies and partners, and the written response will do that as well.
State Department spokesman Ned Price in the State Department briefing room. As of his briefing mid-afternoon on Tuesday, he said that that written response had not yet been transmitted to Russia. CNN has an article that begins, if you're watching state TV in Moscow, you're seeing video of troops and tanks, barbed wire, and snipers taking aim, but it's not Russia's forces that are poised for attack. It's NATO's. They write, welcome to Russia's mirror image depiction of the showdown over Ukraine. In a country's alternate media landscape, NATO forces are carrying out a plan that's been in the works for years. Encircle Russia, topple President Vladimir Putin, and seize control of Russia's energy resources. That from CNN. You're listening to Washington Today. Now to the U.S. economy. This from CNBC. The Federal Reserve expected to signal at its meeting this week that it is ready to raise interest rates as soon as March and that it will consider other policy tightening. The Fed issues its policy statement Wednesday afternoon at the end of its two-day meeting, expected to show it's willing to take the steps necessary to fight inflation. Democrats in Congress also working on legislation designed to deal with inflation and easing supply chain problems. The House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, Democrat from Maryland, outlining some of the priorities today. interviewed by Politico Playbook.
I was on a Zoom call with Secretary Raimondo, Secretary of Commerce. She believes very, very strongly that the bill that came over from the Senate on competitiveness and innovation will have a very positive effect in bringing inflation down. Again, because you're going to get people back to work. Build Back Better does that. The infrastructure bill is going to create better supply routes, investment in roads and bridges and airports and seaports, so that investment, as opposed to spending is here today and gone tomorrow. Investment is for the long term and promotes growth, opportunities, and jobs, and well-paying jobs. We think all of those bills do that. So when the Republicans ask me, well, what are you going to do about infrastructure? I say, we're doing it. What are we going to do about inflation? And yes, of course, inflation is a problem. I go to the grocery store and I see some shelves that are empty. That's not about inflation, that's about the supply side. But because the supply is down, prices go up because demand is not. Why is demand not? Because employment is up. We have more people went back to work over the last year than have gone back in history. We have down from 6.4 down to 3.9% unemployment. And money in people's pockets. I said that's what the plan that we passed in March did. And so, yes, we have to make sure that balance comes back. And these bills go to that end. And so I think we are doing it. We believe they will be successful when and if passed. We passed some of them. We need to pass the others.
The House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer at an event hosted by Politico Playbook. An article at Bloomberg News begins. The Biden administration has concluded that a global semiconductor shortage will persist until at least the second half of this year, promising long-term strain on a range of U.S. businesses, including automakers and the consumer electronics industry. Joining us now is one of the reporters on that article, covers technology, Ian King. Thank you so much for doing this. How severe is this chip shortage?
Yeah, I mean, what the report today out of the Biden administration does is confirm what the industry has basically been telling us over the last 12 months or so, is that there's no end in sight for all of these shortages, which have particularly hit automakers, but caused a lot of shortages of other things from, basic household electronics to industrial machinery until at the earliest the second half of this year, and likely for many of these areas not until 2023.
Why is the shortage happening and persisting?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of reasons. We have the pandemic, which has caused both disruptions to the supply chain, whether it's transport, whether it's, closure of factories and so forth, and that's impacted the supply side. But on the flip side, the pandemic has caused changes to the economy, the way that we work, the way that we play, that have created a tremendous boost in demand for certain aspects, and the chip industry just hasn't been able to keep up with that demand.
Is part of the problem that the chips are not made in the U.S.?
That's been one of the derivative arguments that U.S. politicians have said, but really not so much. It's more a factor overall of the sort of inertia that is inherent in the chip industry. It's, if you look at it this way, that when we first started to talk about chip shortages roughly 2 years ago, if at that moment every chip company that makes chips had started to dig a hole in the ground and pour concrete, we still wouldn't have any output from those factories right now. It just takes too long and it's too complicated to build these things, equip them, and then to start production, and the production cycle takes 3 months, that it wouldn't have had any effect. And really, we're only starting to get that kind of wide-scale reaction, that kind of massive ramp-up, as the industry called it, this year. So realistically, for example, Intel's Ohio plant, which was announced last week, won't be coming online until 2025.
You also write the Commerce Department report highlights the limited options available to the Biden administration as it tries to respond to the crisis. What are those options?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you've nailed it with a very good question there, is that, going into this report, there was a lot of fuss made about, we need all of these inputs and then we'll get involved and we'll make some changes. And really, if you actually read the report, they do say at one point this is kind of best left to the industry. And I think what it has revealed, unfortunately, is that there aren't that many options, particularly for short-term solutions, that this is a very complicated industry, both in terms of the technology of production and also of the, geographic diversity of the supply chain and the speed at which the industry works, that really government action just isn't an option, unfortunately.
Ian King is a technology reporter out of San Francisco with Bloomberg. Find his stories at Bloomberg.com. Follow him on Twitter at Ian M. King. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On Wall Street today, the Dow down 66, but like yesterday, it was a wild swing. At one point, the Dow was down over 800. NASDAQ finishing down 315, S&P down 53. International Monetary Fund releasing an updated global economic forecast for the year, and it is lower than 3 months ago due to COVID and the Omicron variant, rising energy costs, supply chain problems. The new estimate for 2022 is 4.4% worldwide growth. Last October, it was 6% growth. General Motors announcing a multi-billion-dollar investment in Michigan to increase electric pickup truck production and build a new EV battery cell plant. GM says it will be America's top seller of electric vehicles by the middle of this decade, taking over the top spot from Tesla. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, a Democrat, was on hand for the announcement today in Lansing.
It is a great day in Michigan. We are announcing that GM's investing $7 billion in Delta and Orion townships to create and retain 5,000 good-paying jobs building electric vehicles and batteries. Now, this story started with horse-drawn carriages in Flint at the turn of the 20th century. It continued as Michigan assembled an arsenal of democracy to win World War II and put the whole world on wheels. The story was told by generations of UAW workers who built the best vehicles in the world and formed the backbone of the American middle class. And it's a story about possibility, perseverance, and purpose. And it defines who we are in Michigan. Like Chevy, it runs deep. Today, that story continues because GM is doubling down on their commitment to make it in Michigan, building on our legacy and forging our future as leaders of electrification. GM's $7 billion investment in their all-electric future will create 4,000 good-paying jobs and retain another 1,000 right here in Michigan. And these jobs will generate more than $35 billion in new personal income over the next 20 years. That's $35 billion in economic opportunity for Michiganders that will be spent at small businesses, invested in our communities to help them grow and thrive. So by partnering with the UAW and the state of Michigan, GM will invest $4 billion to convert the Orion Township assembly plant to build full-size electric pickup trucks. $2.5 billion to build their third U.S.-based battery manufacturing facility in Delta Township, and $550 million in 2 Lansing area vehicle assembly plants to upgrade production capabilities. These investments will build on GM's enormous presence in Michigan. With today's announcement, they've invested more than $18 billion in Michigan since 2011, and they employ over 50,000 of our neighbors and friends here in Michigan at 31 facilities, including their first fully dedicated electric assembly plant, Factory Zero in Hamtramck, which I know is near and dear to Mary Barrow's heart, and the new Wallace Battery Cell Innovation Center in Warren. Today's investment is proof of what's possible when we work together.
Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer at the announcement in Lansing, Michigan today. A statement from President Joe Biden says the GM investment is the latest sign that my economic strategy is helping power an historic American manufacturing comeback. From day one, my administration has been laser focused on making sure that America leads the manufacturing future of electric vehicles. Washington Today continues in a minute.
Republican Senator Johnny Isakson died in December 2021. Democratic Congressman John Lewis died in July 2020, both from Georgia and both with deep admiration and respect for each other. In the latest episode of the weekly podcast, we remember the friendship of John Lewis and Johnny Isakson, built on public displays of bipartisanship and hugs.
You have been very good to the people of the state of Georgia, and I'm lucky enough and just blessed really to call you a friend and a brother. Thank you so much. Madam Speaker, it is almost difficult to yield back the time when I speak of this good and great leader from the state of Georgia. Thank you, brother, for your service. I will come over and meet you, brother.
C-SPAN's The Weekly. Find it and follow wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast. Get it on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. The Tallahassee Democrat newspaper in Florida has this. Governor Ron DeSantis and the state surgeon general are condemning Monday's decision by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration to halt the distribution of antibody treatments that have become central to the state's COVID response. Because of the FDA's decision Monday, appointments for more than 2,000 Floridians to receive this treatment were canceled Tuesday, the governor said. All monoclonal antibody treatment sites have been shut down, the Department of Health announced late Monday evening. And the article goes on, the Food and Drug Administration announced late Monday it was revoking the emergency use authorization granted for drugs from Regeneron and Eli Lilly because they are ineffective against the Omicron variant, responsible for nearly all new cases of COVID-19 in the U.S. Today, Governor Ron DeSantis held a news conference in Crawfordville, Florida.
This morning, thousands of Floridians woke up to news that their appointments to get treatment for COVID-19 infection were canceled by the Biden administration, which outright revoked authorization for two very popular monoclonal antibody treatments that the state of Florida really pioneered over the summer and that we've worked hard to make available to our residents who needed treatment. Mind you, the people that seek this treatment are overwhelmingly people that have been vaccinated, but yet they're still infected, and many of them are high risk. Now, they are relying on revoking this and pulling the rug out from under people on a single, non-peer-reviewed, non-clinical study that was actually done by a consultant for a rival company to the other two monoclonal antibody treatments. This is not based on a clinical trial. This is not even peer-reviewed. And so this is something that they claim shouldn't be used because we have Omicron. And what we would say in Florida is we have had people use it and we've had good results. It's not 100%. We understand that. But you also don't even know when someone goes in whether it's Omicron or still the Delta. Yes, mostly in Florida it's going to be Omicron at this point. But it's really a reckless decision to be able to take this option away from patients when we've had the sites set up, we've had this distributed to different medical groups or hospitals. And if somebody wants to try, it was very effective against the Delta. If you look at once that program went in, you saw a huge decline in hospitalizations. And we were proud to be able to fill really a void which shouldn't have existed if you had people, the higher ups, were actually promoting early treatment, which they weren't. So we're proud of that. But even if with Omicron it's half as effective or even 25% as effective, that's better than nothing for people. And as I've said, anecdotally, we've had people that have had their symptoms resolved after doing it just in the last month of doing this. So this is wrong what they're doing. And we have many people now who are very concerned because they were going to go in and get it today or tomorrow. And now they're being told that it would be illegal for a provider to give it to them, all based off one observational, non-peer-reviewed study. And this is done, I think, in a very haphazard fashion.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, a Republican, news conference day in Crawfordville, Florida. At the White House in Washington, Press Secretary Jen Psaki asked to respond.
The FDA yesterday withdrew the EUA for some monoclonal antibody treatments because they don't work against Omicron. But Florida continues to push for the treatment for people in the state. What's your response to Governor DeSantis, and what's your message to the people of Florida?
Well, let's just take a step back here just to realize how crazy this is a little bit. We've approached COVID treatments like filling a medicine cabinet. We're not relying on one type, one brand, or treatment. We invested in and continue to buy a variety across monoclonal antibodies, pre-exposure prevention therapies, and oral antivirals. We have provided 71,000 doses of antivirals to Florida, including 34,000 additional treatments that do work against Omicron just this last week. I'm sorry, of a range of those treatments, I should say, to be clear. What the FDA is making clear is that these treatments, the ones that they are fighting over, that the governor is fighting over, do not work against Omicron, and they have side effects. That is what the scientists are saying. We have sent them 71,000 doses of treatments that are effective against Omicron and are effective also against Delta. And they are still advocating for treatments that don't work. We've seen, unfortunately, from the beginning in our pandemic response, a range of steps or pushes that have been made through social media platforms, unfortunately from the mouths of elected officials, and the advocating for things that don't work, even when we know things do work. Injecting disinfectant, promoting other pseudoscience, sowing doubt on the effectiveness of vaccines and boosters, and now promoting treatments that don't work. We know what works, vaccines and boosters. We have a range of doses of things that do work in treatments, and we're providing those to Florida.
The White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki. Anti-vaccine activist Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is apologizing today for suggesting that he suggested at a weekend rally in D.C. that things are worse for people today dealing with vaccines than they were for Anne Frank, the teenager who died in a Nazi concentration camp after hiding with her family in a secret annex in Amsterdam for 2 years before being discovered. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. tweeting, "I apologize for my reference to Anne Frank, especially to families that suffered the Holocaust horrors. My intention was to use examples of past barbarism to show the perils from new technologies of control. To the extent my remarks caused hurt, I am truly and deeply sorry." A new study from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention today finding that the COVID-19 Omicron variant is on average causing less severe disease than surges with previous variants. Still, the study says the vast number of Omicron cases is causing a large number of severe cases, overall putting a strain on hospitals. COVID Omicron also affecting children in some ways that the previous variants did not, and not for the better. This according to Dr. Kurt Newman, President and CEO, Children's National Hospital.
Through the beginning parts of the pandemic with the original variants, we would see routinely at a peak maybe 20 patients in the hospital, and they were sick, and about a third of them would go to the ICU. And people were thinking, well, maybe it doesn't have that much impact on children. But as things went along, and now with this Omicron variant, we've seen just how, what a false kind of set of conclusions that was. This variant is hitting children hard, it's hitting them differently, and it's really impacting our hospital. You know, with the other variants, our peak would be about 20 kids in the hospital at a time. Lately, it's been about 60 or 70. About a third of those children are in the ICU. And then what we're seeing now, too, is there's this syndrome that happens 2 to 3 weeks after the coronavirus. It's called multi-system inflammatory syndrome, where the body's system inflammatory and immune system attacks itself because it's turned on somehow by the virus, and we're seeing that, and those kids are ending up in the ICU. So those are just numbers. But you know, as a doctor before I was a CEO, and as a dad and married to a nurse, the impact when you see a child that's struggling to breathe, that can't get air, and we have to put them on a ventilator or do those kinds of things. It is just really, as you pointed out, putting a lot of pressure on our doctors, our nurses, the pharmacists, the folks that keep the hospital clean. And so there's stress. But I am so proud of how our hospital has stepped up. We have not turned a patient away. We haven't closed a clinic. We had a huge snowstorm here right in the midst of the peak of the pandemic when we had 60, 70 of these kids in the hospital. So we're here to meet the needs of the children, and our teams will do that. And I know that that's true across the country at all the children's hospitals that we work with.
Dr. Kurt Newman is president and CEO, Children's National Hospital, at a virtual program today hosted by Washington Post Live. That hot mic moment from President Biden from Monday getting a lot of attention. Fox News reporter Peter Doocy asking the president about high inflation and whether it's a political liability. The president calling Doocy a stupid son of a, you can fill in the rest. White House saying that the president called Doocy to apologize, and this was the topic, the last topic, raised at today's White House briefing with the press secretary, Jen Psaki.
One last question.
Sure.
Forgive me, it's sort of the elephant in the room. Many people in the country were talking about it last night and this morning. Does the president regret saying what he said about Peter? Can you shed some light if you have had any conversations with him today about what happened last night?
Well, I would say what's most important, and it's Peter sitting here, so this is kind of a funny thing, but the president called Peter, and he confirmed this, so this is only why I'm speaking to this. And if you have private conversations with the president, I will assure you I'm not going to convey that on your behalf. But Peter spoke to this. The president called him. He conveyed to him that it was nothing personal, man, and also acknowledged that all of you are going to ask him a range of questions. So I think that speaks for itself. Thank you, everyone. Hopefully I did that justice.
Can't confirm. Person familiar.
Person familiar. Okay. We only do on-the-record stuff here, Peter. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki. And finally, this from the Hill newspaper. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat from California, announced on Tuesday that she will run for re-election in 2022, quelling speculation that the 81-year-old lawmaker may put her speaker's gavel down. And after more than 3 decades in Congress, Pelosi first elected to the House in 1987 in a special election, said that U.S. democracy is at risk, which makes the upcoming election crucial. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. For more top Washington stories, subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word. Go to c-span.org/connect to subscribe. Have a good night.